Hey guys, Tim here, back for another Chicago Northwestern Harvard Subdivision and N scale. And yes, you are looking at an entirely new part of the layout. And as you're going to see here in a minute, the local is leaving the lumber siding, getting back onto the main to return to the yard. As you see a 400 coming around, getting up to speed on the center track. So, yes, obviously from this clip, a lot has happened in the past week. So, let me tell you how we got to this point. So, we started off the week kind of eagerly waiting to get our basement painted. It's kind of hard to tell in this lighting, but the dark green color really didn't look very good. You can see I taped off where the two access points were. I didn't want that messed with. But then they got the painting done on Monday, and it looked loads better. It's going to help with lighting with the layout as I progress farther along. But as soon as the paint dried Monday night, it was time to get back to work. And so I went through, and you can see I already marked. I wanted to make sure I knew where the studs were because I was going to mount the benchwork to the studs themselves on the back wall. I marked on the back 1x4 where that would go to make sure that I didn't put the cross braces where I would need to be screwing into the studs. So I went out into the garage. I was given a miter saw for my birthday. My birthday was earlier this month, which was huge to make accurate cuts. Not just accurate straight cuts, but I needed to make some angled cuts for where the track is going to connect across the doorway to the other side. So you can see here, I used just some leftover scrap wood that was too short, and I practiced what I wanted those angled cuts to look like for that segment that would serve the swing gate area. So I put everything together. You can see down there I also picked up an impact driver because I picked up a tip from Ron's Trains and Things to have one drilling and one for screwing, and it does really save so much time if you have two. So I brought it inside after I got that done, and I had to use some tubs and things to prop up the other side of the bench work while I was working on this, but my goal was just to make sure that I set it up an inch and a half below where the cork road bed was, because that'll be account for the ½ inch of plywood and the 1 inch of foam I'm going to use. You can see my priority was to keep this as dead level as possible as I mounted it, and I kept checking as I did that, and it's level going the way that you can see the level, but I also needed to put legs in the front just to help stabilize it and make sure that it's also level going the other way. But you can see I was constantly checking to make sure that air bubble is right where it needed to be. Another thing I picked up were some bits to do countersinking, so that way the heads of the screws were flush with the plywood as I put it in, which made things a million times easier. I ran into that problem in the staging yard. I didn't want to repeat that problem over here. And again, you can see I'm checking almost too much to make sure it's level, just because I don't want that to ruin later construction. You can see I'm starting to put the foam down here, and I'm throwing as much weight down as I can to make sure, because again, I want to make sure the height is as good as possible to connect to what I had already laid, connecting in to the staging yard. You can see also I put the legs in, and I'll put some cross braces on to stabilize those, and just make sure that everything's good to go. But that made sure that it was really, and I screwed it in to 4 different studs, which kept it really level. One thing I was also looking at, I'm planning on getting the backdrop installed soon, and I was nervous. My plan was to do 12-inch height on the backdrop, and I thought that was too short, but you can see here I'm checking relative to the size of the locomotives. 12 inches is plenty of height for the backdrop. You can see in the foam the scoring marks where I did just a rough radius check, and I realized I really only needed to get the radius right for the first curve, because I knew that I wanted to keep the tracks 1.25 inches separated on center, and so I just checked that distance for the other tracks. And you can see I laid the cork road bed down, standard cork road bed, and then I got the first innermost track laid down, and I wanted to test and see if it would run smoothly over these tracks. And I haven't wired it yet, so this is literally just picking up power from being connected with feeders. This was kind of a pain. In hindsight, when I do the upper level, I'll probably make sure that the two curves are connected before I lay the first curve. And the reason I say that is because with the wall right there, it was really hard to get into proper position to fasten it through. But you can see, and I've got a little height issue I need to fix, which will be easy. But you can see that the P42 runs through no problem, and is sitting good to go. But like I said, I think that'll be an adjustment that I do next time is to lay the bench work on both sides, uh, pre-measure, get the flex track shaped the way I need it to roughly, and maybe even solder that connection to make sure it doesn't fall apart. Because again, it was really hard. I definitely realized that this was sturdy bench work though, because at one point I had to really lean and put my full weight in to get it over there. Um, but then I tested it, and you can see what the height issue was here. That it's kind of um, causing these longer cars to get stuck a little bit. So I made some adjustments, and I think my long-term adjustment will be that I'll put like some nails or screw heads, and then get the track height to where I need it to be and solder it. Kind of like what people do on liftgate sections and adjoining sectional work, just to make sure that the rails get to where they need to be. There's barely a height difference, maybe a millimeter, but at end scale, at the scale this size, that makes all the difference. So I made some temporary adjustments to see if it would work, and came around and did another test train to make sure before proceeding with laying the other tracks. And I am seeing what a lot of other modelers have said on their YouTube channels, that it's really easy to get distracted from getting your work done by just running trains. So even in this configuration, I found myself definitely getting distracted by that. But you can see this time curved around no problem, even with the long coaches, and feeling pretty good. So it was also nice just to be able to you can see how long these trains are, even with the full curves. The five locomotives and the P42 on either end takes up a lot of traffic, which is why I love N scale. It's a chance to run these longer size trains, and why I'm really happy with the layout plan that I have, because it gives me plenty of running length of main line to let a longer passenger train like this run through scenery, and look pretty solid. So after that, I realized I needed to get the rest of the tracks laid down. So I laid down the interior track, and again, I just kept checking to make sure if the interior track was an inch and a quarter center to center from the track I already laid. Same thing with the far right track, and you can see I'm using one of these uh, auto carriers to check and make sure that it's smooth running, because I figure if it can handle the auto carriers, the coaches, the intermodals, then I'll be good to go. The other piece I wanted to check once I got the third track down was I'm still paranoid about curve radius. Again, I know it looks correct when I do it in the track plan, but I'm just really paranoid that I'm gonna have curve radii that are too close, that the track are too close, and that it's gonna mess things up. And so I wanted to test to make sure, uh, if I put a train on each of the tracks that were running, pretty lengthy consist and pretty lengthy rolling stock attached to them. So you can see this local here. I've got a tank car in there. I've got one of the auto racks on there. I wanted to make sure that would look good. So you can see this one going around the curve. And these are some of the tightest radius that I'm going to have on the layout, just because it has to make that curve out of the staging yard and onto the main line. The rest of it is more like 20, 22, 24-inch radius curves, and I think that it's going to look really good for these long coach cars, for the Metra bi-levels, and for others, because that's another reason why I really wanted to do N over HO, is I didn't want too tight of curves to really make the trains look unnatural as they're progressing across the layout. So you can see here, I backed up a set of my intermodal carriers down this track, and even with these lengthier trains on each of the three tracks, everything was smooth. There was plenty of space, as you can see here. There's plenty of space between the tracks still. And again, this isn't a scenario that's actually going to happen, right? You're not going to see a train on every track right here at the mouth leading into the staging yard. But I figured test it like that and we're good to go. So once I knew that, I took the trains off. I resumed laying cork. My plan for this week was to stop at about here And the reason why is because I wanted to make sure I don't want to lay any other track until I get the swing gate out, and because I want to make sure the curves look good. You can see what I'm checking here. I put insulation joiners in here, and I wanted to make sure there was no power on the other side of the insulation joiner, because for block detection and other reasons, I wanted this to be. It seems like a logical place to have a section gap, because this will be where everybody's coming out of the yard, basically. But like I said, I didn't want to lay much more straight track past this point because I want to make sure that I get the connection between this side of the door and the other side of the door built, and then I want to lay the track because I want to take a Dremel and cut where the swing gate will be, so that way I make sure that it's a smooth curve going in. And you can see I've got another train coming around because I'm testing to make sure I laid the siding. This is the siding for the lumber, and I wanted to make sure that I wanted to make sure it was a smooth siding that I could run the trains down and not have any issues. So I figure the best way to test it is just to run trains through, on the tracks, run it over, just to make sure. And so once I knew that that looked good, really the final thing I wanted to do this week was do the first bit of wiring on this side of the wall, right? Because obviously the wiring is pretty much good to go in the unfinished room for the staging, but I didn't just want these tracks to work because they're carrying the power over from where the feeders were in the other room. I wanted to actually get some feeders going. So I knew that would be the next step. So I wanted to lay enough straight track on the other side of the insulation joiners, so that way I could get power feeders installed, but again, not go, so much farther that it would compromise my ability to have smooth running track over the swing gate that I'm going to be installing. So you can see here, I laid, hopefully you can see the feeders sticking out a little bit on each of the 3 tracks. I will need to lay one more set of feeders after I get tracks on the other side of the switch. I laid the feeders for the siding, but then I attached the terminals underneath there. You can see I got everything wired up and ready to go. And then I had to go through, I don't know why it rotated the video here, but you can see I had to drill through the benchwork in the wall a little bit to get the connection going so I could run the bus wires through the wall. So I got it through, and you can see I put the light on the other side so that way I could make sure I knew where the connection was. I then connected my bus wires. I just taped them to an old piece of flex track so that way I could feed them through the hole in the wall. And I just did a temporary connection just with a wire net connector so that way I could run that up to the terminal strips for now. I'll do a more permanent solution longer term, but this way I could get it going. This is kind of my vantage point. I really need to get a wireless throttle because right now the only way I can run the throttle and see what's going on in the finished layout is to kind of stand in the frame of the door. But you can see here I'm sending the P42 around because I want to make sure that it will still run on the other side of the insulation joiners, because now there's power on the other side of those joiners. And you can see I'm actually gonna run it off the rails just to make sure, but you can see that it worked. And so then I wanted to get the shot that you saw at the start of the video where I figured it'd be cool to see a local leaving the siding as a passenger train runs through on the center track. And so I was really excited to do that. And then so I was gonna back up the SD60 and the 2 box cars coming out of the staging yard, and you might be able to tell by kind of how I'm phrasing this that I ran into one last issue that I had to problem solve. You're going to see it in this video here. Actually, I realized I threw it onto the wrong track, so then I had to back it back up. I had to back it back up and run it back through. But you're going to see here in a minute when it comes around. I thought everything was good to go because, again, you saw me check the P42, and it ran on the other side of the insulation joiners on the other track. So in my mind, that meant everything was good to go, that the power was going to the terminals properly and then going up through the feeders. But then once I got the local onto the proper track and ran it around, and you're going to see it coming around here in a minute, that's not going to replicate on the siding for some reason, which surprised me and then kind of threw me in a panic because up until this point, I've had no issue with the electrical wiring on any of the tracks that I've done. And if you've watched my previous videos, you know that I've thoroughly tested every single track, run it through. But you can see here, it's backing up just fine, and then boom, the minute that it crosses over, it's completely dead. And that totally, like I said, threw me for a loop. I mean, obviously I knew what that meant. That meant that one or more of the feeders going into that siding was bad. I initially thought maybe that there was an issue with like the switch, or that it had hit the unpowered frog. But as you can see here, nothing doing. There's no lights. There's no indication that it's running, even though I'm sending the commands to the DCC throttle. Something was obviously wrong. So I went and I grabbed one of my Rapido Horizons because as you can see here, it's it picks up power to light. I figured it'd be a really good test. So, I'm testing it here, and no matter whether it's on, one side of the joiners or another, it's running. It's got lights. I checked the interior track, which I hadn't tested yet. You see lights, and then when I put it on the siding, there's no. I think I might cut off because I forgot to pan over, but there's no lights, right? So there you can see there's no lights. So clearly that's a problem. So I fired up the soldering iron. I figured, okay, clearly I had a bad solder. But then I thought for the last minute, I'm going to reinstall the wires on the terminal strips, and that did it. I just didn't make a good connection on the terminal for the black wire, and we were good to go. And so then I was able to do one more quick test, and that got us to the clip that you saw at the start, with it coming out of the siding. So that's everything that we did, and it was quite a bit this week. So I'm thrilled. I've got my first bit of Benchwork that will eventually have scenery up and running. I've got my first bit of tracks on the main part of the layout up and running. And the next big step, now I'm out of town for all of next week for a work thing, so unfortunately it's going to be 2 weeks before the next video. But the next big thing is building the Benchwork on the other side of the door, so that way I can finish building the connection between those two parts, and I'll get a whole lot more track done in the next video. So thank you to everybody who's been watching, who's been liking, commenting, subscribing. It feels really, really good to actually have some progress on the finished side of the layout, and I can't wait to make even more progress, so that way, unlike this week, it's not just going to be a quick few feet out of the staging yard and stop. We're going to actually get to do like true mainline running of the trains. The other piece that maybe I'll be able to share with you, I've sent several of my pieces out to get the custom paint work done. We'll see how fast that's able to get done, but otherwise we'll finish where we started, which is the local coming out of the lumber yard, while the 400 rounds the corner on the center main track. So again, thank you very much. Please keep tuning in. We'll take 1 week off while I'm out of town, and then we'll get back at it in 2 weeks with another update. But until next time, see you later, everybody.